Talk to banks, and we talked to many banks throughout history. Credit Suisse had been a big supporter of ours, and ultimately they were lead left on our IPO. Really, the banks were pointing towards kind of $100 million of EBITDA, if you thought about that and targeting that to have the necessary scale to interest investors. Really, what you're trying to do is have a big enough entity to go public with. And I think ultimately at that $18 share price and roughly the share count at that point, we're right around the billion dollar company when we went public. And so that was kind of a couple of the key hurdles in my mind as we think about really you want institutional investors to feel good about putting in all the work to understand the company, to value the company, to make that initial investment. And so probably that $100 million of EBITDA, billion dollar enterprise value at that point was real critical. And so 2017, we really see the production ramp, the ramp in the rigs, ducts, permits happening. And so the board approves the process to go public because at that point, we really had to, the primary mission was to build out the accounting team because we had shared a jointly shared accounting staff with Brigham Resources. And so we could begin that process, hire our controller. November, December of 17, he rapidly adds, and we're off to the races with the accounting staff. As we think about, maybe we'll just talk about some of the history of the IPO process because sure. It's convoluted. There's lots of ebbs and flows. It can be pretty rocky as you walk across it and try to get through the process. But 2018, really the keys are to identify the banks you're going to work with. Who are your lead banks? So at that point, we identify Credit Suisse and Goldman as a couple of our lead banks. Who are the law firms you're going to work with? So at that point, we're working with V&E, Doug McWilliams, Thomas Zentner were our key contacts there, very supportive throughout the entirety of the process. Start to putting together the document. So the document is the S1 that gets filed, at least initially privately with the SEC, and then eventually flips to a public document. So we're going throughout that process. Continue to add to staff. Also interesting, during that period, we're actually conducting dry runs in terms of doing quarterly reporting. You know, we're putting together press releases as if we were public, putting together 10Qs to make sure you're ready to go public. Because we had at that point, kind of April, May of 18, at least the thought that in the fall of 18, we'd likely go public. We're also spending, both myself, Blake Williams, and Jacob, a lot of time going to institutional investor events. Because if you think back to 18, there weren't a lot of institutional investors familiar with minerals. So there was a lot of education, having to explain the difference between a net mineral acre, a net royalty acre. What is a mineral? Leasing minerals, how does that happen? What does a lease mean? How do you guys generate your cash flow? So there was a lot of background work that went into educating investors in that late 2017, 2018 timeframe into 2019. As I mentioned, kind of the hope was to go public late in 18. Unfortunately, the equity markets weren't there. Equity markets have to be almost perfect for a company to go public. There's got to be low.
And describe that. Like, yeah. What is perfect equity markets, or the right environment, or the window of opportunity being narrow? These are high level things that are thrown around a lot. What are the factors that determine that?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, any investor, when they think about making an investment in an energy company, they want solid, strong energy prices. You can't be in the midst of a downward energy cycle. They want low volatility in the market, meaning that the market's relatively stable. You're not having 500-600 up and down days on the Dow. They want a management team, I think, that they can trust. And so that's an important point. So you're out there, crude oil pricing strong, low volatility, overall market sentiment's good. The Fed, everything's acting appropriately, acting well, such that the equity markets are performing. And so, because at the end of the day, you're asking these individuals to make a big commitment to the company and the management team, do all the work to evaluate you and undertake that decision whether to go public. And so it's almost like the reserves of a perfect storm. It's got to be perfectly clear, blue skies, almost a bluebird day if you're skiing. You've had 12 inches of powder, and now you have a week of perfect skiing conditions where it's 32 degrees and you can ski forever in really good conditions. And so you're really looking for that perfect window to go public. And so it wasn't there in 2018. But the key is to be constantly ready as you think about going public. So you got to maintain all your filings with with the SEC. So all that's happening in the background. Public investors aren't seeing that because you're getting those documents ready, resubmitting those on a quarterly basis. So you're ramping up that. You're continuing to answer any SEC questions. You as a team are just in a constant state of readiness in terms of hitting the road at any one point. And so very fortunately, kind of early 2019, we start to see the overall markets act better. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, launch our process, I think flip the company public in terms of taking the S1 and making it publicly available to look at, I think either late March or early April of 2019. And then we have an 8-day or so roadshow that we're going through, visiting with institutional investors in New York, Boston, we hit Chicago, Dallas, Houston, Los Angeles, a lot of phone calls along the way too. So it's a grind, but at the end of the day, you're asking people to make a big commitment. And obviously that roadshow today is much different than in the post-COVID world where a lot of those meetings were held virtually. But to me, there's no better way that for an institutional investor to get to know the management team and the management team to really pitch their story to the institutional investors than to meet one-on-one in their offices. And it just feels people are very open, can ask a lot of questions, and they're hard questions. You're asking them to invest a lot of capital. So you've got to be constantly ready to answer that hard question. So it's a very stressful process, but obviously it's one that the team met the challenge and we were able to complete that process in April of 2019, and very fortunately take the company public. And at that point, the private equity firms own about 65% of Brigham Minerals. And so that's both the private equity firms as well as management. And then about 35% of the company is owned by the new group of investors that have come in through the IPO.